Mrs. Riley and only Mrs. Riley, can you please tell the court how many fingers you see now? You were serious about that? I'm an old Jersey boy who used to hang around wise guys and Sopranos, and who doesn't like the movie Cousin Benny? But here's a case south of the Hudson now proceeding before the state courts in the Old Dominion state, not the Garden State, where sovereign immunity is alive and well, they say, but at least according to Tim Kaine, old Virginia is dead. During the first impeachment of one Donald J. Trump, one voter in Northern Virginia who was attending an impeachment town hall had risen to claim that 2/3 of Americans know that quid pro quo means bribe. Obviously didn't take Latin at Jesuit school. The subject of discussion had been alleged attempts of the former president to exert pressure on the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, to investigate the son of then Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, offering approximately $250 million in military aid. Was that a bribe? Well, technically, were one to examine the Latin phrase quid pro quo, it only means this for that, the basis of any commercial contract or agreement. And so even if 2/3 of Americans know that quid pro quo means bribe, they would be incorrect in a courtroom or a Latin examination, because that legal term of art only connotes that in exchange for a thing of value, intended consideration had formed the basis of an agreement or contract to commit or omit some official act by a public official, specifically an American public official, which, sorry to tell you, the Ukrainian president is not. And in a criminal prosecution, the government must establish beyond a reasonable doubt that a defendant had committed every element of the offense to avoid a verdict of not guilty. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb. I am the former childhood protege of a legendary criminal defense and civil rights attorney. Mrs. Riley and only Mrs. Riley, can you please tell the court how many fingers you see now? And presently awaiting a green light to proceed before the circuit court for the city of Alexandria because of a pre-filing injunction that had been imposed by the local prosecutor is an action brought in mandamus by an unrepresented litigant, yours truly, to compel the Commonwealth Attorney Brian L. Porter to convene a grand jury investigation into allegations involving bribery, in which the incumbent legislator in Washington, Don Beyer Jr., has been implicated. Last September, Prosecutor Porter had asserted a claim of absolute prosecutorial discretion as a first line of defense in another case, but now for the incumbent, claiming that no lawful authority could compel him to do anything, even if there was found probable cause that his fellow Democrat and fellow VCU alumnus, Mayor Justin Wilson, had committed cold-blooded murder or heinous acts of terror. And at least last September, the Alexandria Circuit Court Judge James C. Clark, presiding, had agreed. However, in December, Judge Clark suddenly announced his retirement, while also simultaneously Mayor Wilson announced that he would not seek re-election after some 16 years of service in elected office, leaving Prosecutor Porter alone to attempt to prevent this action from moving forward now in the Alexandria court. Under the laws of the Commonwealth, an attorney for the Commonwealth, in mandatory language, shall have the duties and powers imposed upon him by general law, including the duty of prosecuting all warrants, all indictments or informations charging a felony, as codified at VA Code Section 15.2-1627B. And if any person corruptly give, offer, or promise to any candidate any gift or gratuity with intent to influence, he shall be guilty of a Class 4 felony, not misdemeanor, and shall forfeit to the Commonwealth any such gift or gratuity given. Under BA Code Section 18.2438, under the elements of the offense, which must be established beyond a reasonable doubt to secure a conviction, one would be required to have a criminal defendant or suspect who had 2, with a bad purpose, 3, given, offered, or promised, 4, any gift or gratuity, 5, to a candidate, and 6, with intent to influence the recipient, a similar criminal statute as had been enacted in New Jersey, the Garden State, and applied to the conviction of one John Lake, who had been serving as the mayor of the township of Carneys Point and running for re-election. During the contentious 2016 election, which one may recall, former U.S. Ambassador Don Beyer was also running for re-election in Virginia's 8th Congressional District, and after the Republican nomination convention, where Charles Hernick had emerged victorious, a former environmental specialist, Congressman Beyer had told the Washington Post that conventional wisdom says this is a Democratic seat, but conventional wisdom is often wrong, so I'm taking nothing for granted. And in that year in which Congressman Beyer had been identified as the heir apparent to ascend to replace Senator Tim Kaine in the Senate, had he been elected as vice president under former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Virginia's 8th Congressional District had been the leading Democrat Party majority district in the entire nation, gaining 6 points and shifting the Cook Partisan Voting Index from D plus 15 to D plus 21. Today, D plus 23. Even bookies would not lay odds on a Republican or anybody else picking up a seat in this district. But nonetheless, Don has already raised over $1 million to secure his re-election by people who think that even with those odds, he might lose. Might Don Beyer have a sufficient motive to offer a bribe back in 2016, as Mayor Lake did in Carneys Point, New Jersey, during his re-election? Motive, means, and opportunity are the only elements that a prosecutor must prove in the movies. And that is where matters get interesting in this twisted tale of nefarious crimes affecting the outcomes of an election, when democracy has often been said to be at stake. Oftentimes, Don Beyer has said that with regard to a certain former president. It just so happens that the job offer to a congressional candidate had been initiated by the Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, which is responsible for the Defense Embassy and Consulate Services, or DECS, DECS, providing at least a tangential connection to the Department of State, where both Clinton and Beyer had some connection and influence, or an opportunity and means to combine with a motive. However, in court, to secure a conviction, a prosecutor would be required to have much more than idle speculation, relying upon the specific elements of the offense. In the Lake case, according to the Superior Court of New Jersey, defendant was the mayor of the township of Carneys Point. Defendant had a long history in local politics at both the municipal and county levels. Similarly, Don Beyer has a long history of public service, which many know, including service as a lieutenant governor, and he had boasted on C-SPAN after his election to succeed Jim the Intimidator Moran in the House of Representatives that he was the only one with the resume. Just as the heated partisan battle for control had peaked during the contentious 2016 election in the Lake case, because the defendant was up for re-election. If his seat was won by a Democrat, control of the local governing body would change parties. And Anthony Rouleau was the Democratic candidate opposing defendant. Rouleau had previously served a term on the township committee as a Republican, but then he switched parties, became a Democrat. But beyond this circumstantial evidence to secure conviction under the state robbery statutes in Virginia and New Jersey, one would be required to have a criminal defendant who had 2 with a bad purpose, 3 given, offered, or promised 4 any gift or gratuity, 5 to a candidate, and 6 with the intent to influence the recipient, and certainly any offer of a promise to a candidate to alter the outcome of an election would be an illegitimate interest and purpose. But Mayor Lake directly approached Rouleau and proposed that if Rouleau would withdraw as a candidate, he would be guaranteed reappointment to the Sewerage Authority when his term expired. Jersey and Sewerage. Go figure. And Rouleau went straight to the police, who built a case for the prosecutor to secure a conviction. But in Virginia, attorneys might argue that Beyer had never and would never do as Mayor Lake did so directly. In New Jersey, directly approaching an opponent to persuade him to withdraw from a congressional race. Not going the approach of, you know, that thing we talked about. However, still, beyond the connection between DIA and the State Department are some disturbing material facts that raise questions about the job offer now before the state courts in Virginia. First, DOD and DIA have never provided any evidence that the congressional candidate who had filed with the Federal Elections Commission, or FEC, by November 2015 had ever applied for the job. Generally, especially intelligence agencies and the federal government don't just give jobs away to anybody. And defense attorneys will have to explain those intriguing facts about a thing of value and compensation that is the equivalent of a stack of dollar bills stacked one atop the other that would measure to half the height of the front of the White House, or more than the price of a 2024 XC90 Recharge plus 6-seater hybrid version at Don Beyer Bobo. Buyer beware. Was Beyer promising more than a car in every garage in 2016? At least for one voter. And that is the question now, before the courts in Alexandria, but not quite making the headlines of his colleague Bobby Menendez in the Senate. And at least for now, Don Beyer's fellow Democrat prosecutor Brian Porter is asserting a claim of prosecutorial discretion, so that no court can compel him to submit the matter to a grand jury. And the Alexandria Circuit Court is reluctantly considering whether this case to compel Prosecutor Porter to begin prosecution will even be permitted to have the complaint considered for proceeding to a trial on the merits. Guarantee of that day in court. And apparently this is what democracy today looks like in Old Town Alexandria. But cool it with the mob connections, won't you? Mrs. Riley and only Mrs. Riley, can you please tell the court how many fingers you see now? This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest.
And y'all come back now. You.